They said, "Burn her house down. She'll have nowhere to go." I was in the kitchen when I heard it. Not a whisper, not a metaphor. A plan. The window above my sink was cracked open, letting in the September air. I like the breeze in the afternoons. Makes the house smell like pine and dust instead of old bones and regret. That breeze also carried voices. His voice, my son, and hers. The one who married him and learned too well how to control him. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, not really. But when your boy stands 10 feet from your open window, talking like you're already dead, well, you listen. "She won't leave willingly," she said. "She won't sign. So we give her no choice. No roof, no power, no way to stay." And then he said it. "My only child. Burn her house down. She'll have nowhere to go." I didn't move, not right away. The ceramic mug in my hand was warm from the tea. Earl Grey with 2 sugars. I always drink it around 3. Always have. It's the only thing that never changes. I just stood there, staring into it, watching the steam curl up like it might spell out a reason why. But nothing came. That night, I didn't cry. I made myself a tuna melt instead. Sat in my recliner with the TV on low, some cooking show with pretty hands and white countertops. I didn't watch it. My mind was elsewhere, on papers tucked in a fireproof box under my bed, insurance documents, the deed, the last will I filed after Henry passed, every line written in my name. No co-owners, no co-signers, no one else, just me. They don't know that. They think I'm still the woman who calls the bank when her card doesn't work, who needs help printing emails, who forgets her online passwords and the names of modern actors. They think they're dealing with someone soft, frail, weak. They forget I built this house with Henry back in '72, with our hands. They forget I raised a boy on shift work and church potlucks. They forget I know how to hide things, real things. The next morning I pulled out the documents, spread them out on the table like a deck of cards. Some dated back to 1984, others as recent as last year. The latest insurance policy with full fire coverage and a rebuild clause they wouldn't think to read. It wasn't just anger I felt. It was something colder, heavier, a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It freezes. You don't yell when your own son plots to destroy what you built. You calculate. That afternoon, I went into town. Asked around, quiet-like, about contractors. Not ones to hire yet, ones I might need, just in case. I told them I was thinking of remodeling, if the Lord gives me a few more years. The men smiled politely. One gave me his card. They thought it was sweet. I kept the card in my wallet. I also bought a new fire extinguisher, not for defense, for optics, for the report later. I thought of everything. That evening, my son came by, stood on the porch like he hadn't been scheming 48 hours ago, asked if I was feeling tired lately. If the stairs were a bit much. Suggested a brochure he'd picked up from a lovely new care facility on the east side of town. I smiled, said I'd think about it. He doesn't know I already called the fire department just to check response times. Doesn't know I've replaced the batteries in all the smoke alarms. Doesn't know I'm ready. Let them come. Let them try. They think a fire would leave me with nothing. But what they don't know is that I've lived through worse than flames. And this time, the ashes will be mine, and so will the payout. Let them strike the match. I'll be holding the policy. He used to call me Mama, softly, with his head on my shoulder, after a bad dream or when his math homework made him cry. Even after he turned 13 and grew embarrassed of everything, even me. I still got Mama when he needed a ride or cash for gas. Now it's just Mom. Clipped. Flat. Like a role I've overstayed. He came by again the next evening. Same hour, same polite tone. Brought me a plastic container of soup. Store-bought, I could tell. Too much sodium, no real herbs. He set it on the counter like a peace offering and started his usual routine. Casual, almost kind. "How's the knee?" he asked, not looking at me. "Still mine," I said. "Still working." He didn't laugh, just smiled like I was making things difficult on purpose. "I just worry about you out here alone," he said, wandering the kitchen like he'd never stood in it 1,000 times. "It's a big property. Lot of upkeep." I nodded. "It's always been a big property." He leaned on the counter. "That's what I mean. It's too much for one person, especially at your age." There it was. The script. I could hear her in it. The woman he married. "I never call her my daughter-in-law. She's never earned the title." "You know what would be easier?" he continued, voice soft like a nurse with bad news. "If you moved somewhere more manageable, safer. We could help you pack. Help sell the place, get you into a what?" I asked, setting down my tea. He hesitated. "A facility." He said it like it was a favor, like he hadn't stood outside my window 2 nights ago and planned my erasure. I walked past him and opened the back door. Let the late sun fall over the porch, the garden, the line of trees beyond the fence. The air smelled like dry leaves and memory. "This house is all I have left," I said quietly. "Your father and I built it with no money and too much hope. We dug every post hole, painted every wall." "I know," he said, though he didn't. "No." I turned to face him. "You don't. You were 6 when we moved in. You don't remember your father breaking his back over that roofline, or how we took turns sleeping on the floor when the bedroom flooded that first winter." He looked away. "You don't remember the cold months," I continued, "when we burned sticks and newspapers because we couldn't afford oil, when we ate potatoes 6 nights a week and called it gourmet." "Mom." "I am not your burden," I said. "I am your mother, and this house is mine." There was a moment of silence. The wind picked up a little, rustling the trees. "You're being emotional," he said. "We're just trying to help." I laughed, bitter and low. "You want to help? Tell your wife to stop setting up private meetings with developers. Tell her I know about the zoning inquiries, the mail you started intercepting, the bank calls I'm not supposed to hear." His face changed then, like a mask slipping. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You do," I replied. He shifted in place, discomfort tightening his jaw. "I'm not signing anything," I added. "And if you think for 1 second that I'm confused or weak or ready to hand over the keys, think again." He moved toward the door. Not a word, just a silent retreat. When he reached the porch, I stopped him. "By the way," I said, "I took the liberty of checking with the county registrar. The deed is clean, no liens, no addendums, still solely in my name." He turned halfway, something bitter on his tongue. "And if anything happens to me," I added calmly, "I've already spoken with an attorney. Everything's been documented." His face fell, then hardened. "You're making this ugly." "No," I said. "I'm keeping it honest." He left without saying goodbye. I closed the door, locked it, and poured myself another cup of tea. Let them try to push me. Let them think I'll fold. But I've been through things that don't end in property lines or paperwork. I've lived through grief and silence and years of being dismissed. And I am not someone you evict with a smile and a soup container. I am not your little mama anymore. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It whispers. Over a teacup, between polite words, in the quiet look someone gives you when they realize you're not as fragile as they were told. Her name was Sandra. 27. Kind eyes. Dark braids pulled into a bun that softened her whole face. She wasn't my nurse, not officially. Just someone the agency sent twice a week to check in, though I never asked for them. Medicare bureaucracy. She brought groceries sometimes, or walked me through my prescription refills. Sweet girl, no pretenses, the kind who always asks before opening a cupboard in your house. That morning, she arrived with a grocery bag and a nervous smile. "You okay, Mrs. Harper?" she asked, setting the milk and eggs on the counter. "You look a little pale today." "I'm fine, sugar," I said. "Just tired of being underestimated." She laughed lightly, unsure what I meant. I didn't explain. Instead, I offered tea. We sat at the small table by the window, the one that used to hold Henry's ashtray and the folded crossword pages he never finished. Sandra pulled out her tablet to update the agency's checklist. Mobility, appetite, mood. "Everything's steady," I told her. "Still making my own tea, still baking when I feel like it." She nodded, tapping the screen. "Any new family visits this week?" "Just my son," I said evenly. "That's good." I replied, and said nothing else. Something in my tone must have caught her attention. She looked up. I met her eyes. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. She hesitated, then set the tablet down. "I probably shouldn't say anything," she began. "But, I also work weekends. Sometimes for private clients." I nodded, curious. "Last Sunday, I was at a house, big, modern, one of those new places up by Ridgeview. Turns out the woman there is your daughter-in-law's cousin. Whole family was there. Open patio, glasses of wine, the usual." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" She bit her lip. "They were talking about you, loud enough not to care if I heard." I waited. Something about permits, construction timelines. The phrase, "after we close on the land," came up more than once. She looked at me carefully. "They talked about your house like it was already theirs, Mrs. Harper." I didn't flinch, just stirred my tea. "Said you'd be in a home by Christmas," Sandra added softly. That once the paperwork's sorted, nothing could stop them, except maybe the old woman being difficult. She paused. "I'm sorry. I just thought you should know." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "Thank you, dear. You were right to tell me." She blinked, surprised. "You're not shocked?" "No. I already smelled the smoke. You've just confirmed where the fire's coming from." We finished our tea in silence. She stayed a few minutes longer than usual, folding grocery bags, asking if I needed anything else. I could tell she wanted to say more, but didn't. After she left, I sat for a while at the kitchen table, staring at the ring mark Henry's mug had made into the varnish years ago. I thought of the patio Sandra described, the laughter, the wine. They'd already poured the glasses, already made the toast. I rose slowly, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out the old wooden box marked private. Inside were things no one remembered I kept. Copies of every tax payment, the land survey from 1971, the hand-drawn plans Henry made for the garage we never built, and beneath all that, two things: the updated insurance policy with my name, only mine, and the stamped legal letter from 6 months ago. The one that said, "To whom it may concern, Mrs. Mary Jean Harper retains full ownership of the property located at 18 South Boone Street. No transfer or co-ownership rights have been granted. They thought I was still that old woman in the worn cardigan, smiling vaguely, forgetting dates. They didn't know I had everything I needed to burn down their plans without lighting a single match. And if the flames came anyway, I'd be ready. There's a photo of me in the hallway, taken the day we moved into this house. I'm 25 in it, holding a hammer and grinning at Henry through the lens. My jeans are dusty, my shoulders sunburned. You can just make out the raw wood frame of the house behind me, barely upright, the lawn still wild and full of rocks. We didn't have much, but we had land and belief. I passed that photo on the way to the bedroom that evening and stopped like I always do. Not to admire myself, those years are gone, but to remember who I was before they all forgot. Back then, I wasn't Mom or Grandma. I was Mary Jean Harper, a woman who could mix concrete with her bare hands, lay tile in the summer heat, pull weeds until her palms split. The quiet type, yes, but not because I didn't have things to say, just because I didn't need to be loud to matter. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the box again. I pulled out every document, every receipt, and laid them out like a quilt across the comforter. A slow pattern began to form. Years of careful planning, deliberate choices, every detail signed and dated. They thought I was one of those mothers who signs whatever's put in front of her. They were wrong. The deed was clean. I'd checked it twice. The insurance policy ironclad, covering everything down to accidental damage and vandalism. The will had been updated in January, naming no one in my immediate family. Everything would pass to a charity I chose myself, one that built homes for women starting over. Let them threaten. Let them talk about retirement homes and paperwork. They didn't know half of what I'd done to prepare. I went to the attic the next morning, moving slow but steady. The air up there is always dry and smells like cardboard and heat. Henry's old military chest still sits under the rafters, full of things we said we'd deal with someday. I opened it, digging past uniforms and letters until I found what I came for. A lockbox, taped shut and labeled in Henry's blocky handwriting, "Do not throw out. Use if needed." Inside was a USB drive, a stack of old receipts, and a worn leather notebook. I brought it downstairs and opened it on the kitchen table. The notebook was Henry's. His last years had been quiet ones, full of slow thoughts and unfinished projects. But he'd written something on the very first page. "If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. Trust no one who treats you like a duty." My hands shook a little as I turned the page. Inside, records of our home improvements, sketches of the property lines, even a copy of the permit for the well we installed in '83. But what mattered most was the last entry, a note scribbled in his scrawl. "Keep the house. No matter what. They'll come for it when they think you're too tired to care." He'd seen it too, even back then. Maybe not the fire, but the erosion, the slow dismissals, the tone in their voices that changed when we stopped being useful and became inconvenient. By lunchtime, I'd packed a folder with everything: insurance, deed, survey maps, Henry's notebook. I took the folder to my lawyer, a quiet woman named Miss Travers who never smiled much, but always remembered the details. She didn't ask questions, just took the papers and nodded. "Have you been pressured?" she asked calmly. "Yes," I replied. "Do you feel threatened?" "Not yet," I said, "but I expect to." She looked me over, then stood and shook my hand with surprising strength. "We'll file copies of everything today," she said. "Digital and physical. And I'll notarize a letter of intent, just in case you need to prove you're of sound mind." I smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you." On the way home, I stopped by the grocery store, bought lemons, flour, and heavy cream. That night, I baked a pie. Why? Because sometimes the only way to keep your hands from turning into fists is to use them for something sweeter, something you control. And because a quiet woman doesn't mean a blind one, not in this house, not ever again. The man at the county clerk's office looked at me like I'd asked him to recite Shakespeare backward. You said you filed a copy of the title here, Mrs. Harper. Yes, I said, evenly. In 2007, after Henry died, I brought the original down myself. He frowned, tapping on his keyboard with the distracted air of someone who didn't expect to find anything. I stood at the counter in my clean blouse and my soft shoes, clutching my folder tight, not moving. Behind me, someone coughed. Another person rustled papers. The line didn't matter. I wasn't leaving without answers. He looked up. Nothing here? I mean, we have the lot number, the property tax records, but no scanned deed or title under your name. I blinked, slowly. What name is it under? He hesitated. That's the thing. It's blank. The record exists, but the owner field is empty. My stomach dropped, like I'd missed the bottom step in the dark. Can I see the file? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. It was true. The parcel was there, the tax history, the zoning code. But where it should have said Mary Jean Harper, there was just a gray line. Like someone had deleted it, or never typed it in at all. I don't understand, I murmured. It was here. I remember the visit. I remember the woman who notarized it. He nodded. Back then, we scanned things to disk before transferring them to digital. If it didn't get converted and the disk is corrupted, then it's gone, I said sharply. Temporarily, he added. We keep physical records in storage, but the turnaround time can be long. I leaned in, lowering my voice. How long? He shrugged. 2 weeks? Maybe 3? Depends on volume. 3 weeks. Long enough for someone with bad intentions to pretend I had no legal claim to the house. I left the office without saying goodbye. Outside, the sun was sharp and unfriendly. My shoes suddenly felt too tight. I drove home in silence. No radio. No thoughts loud enough to name. Just that sinking feeling. The kind you get when you sense something slipping out from under you and you don't know who's pulling. When I got to the house, I locked the door behind me, pulled the blinds, and opened my private file drawer. The copy I kept, my original title, notarized and signed, was exactly where I left it. Except it wasn't the original. I pulled the paper out, held it up to the light. Faint smudges along the signature line. No official seal, no raised stamp. Just a scan. A copy of the title. Not the real one. And in that moment, I knew. It had been taken. Not lost. Not misfiled. Removed. I sat down at the table slowly, my body suddenly heavier than I could carry. Someone had been in this house. Not the nurse. Not the mailman. No one who would understand what to look for. Someone with a key. Or someone who knew where I kept the spare. My son. Or his wife. The thought didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like confirmation. Like watching a slow leak finally turn into a flood. I made myself a cup of tea, hands steady even as my breath faltered. I would call Miss Travers first thing in the morning. We'd file an affidavit of ownership. Attach it to the property record manually. I'd submit copies to the insurance company, the bank, and every utility account tied to this address. And then I'd change the locks. All of them. Including the one on the back porch. The one he installed for me last year when he said I should have a more modern system. I poured the tea. Sat down. This was no longer about just property. This was about erasure. Someone wanted to erase me from my own life, legally, quietly, completely. Before the flames ever touched the walls. But what they didn't count on was that I knew every brick in this house, every document, every drawer, every creak in the floorboards, and I still had the one thing they didn't: the will to fight like hell. There's a patch on the upstairs carpet where the threads are nearly bare, right at the top of the stairs, just before the guest room. I used to trip on it sometimes when Henry was still alive, usually while carrying a laundry basket or a tray of tea. He'd always joke, "This house has its own way of grabbing hold of you." He was right. Every worn edge in this place is a memory. The scuffed baseboards in the hallway from the year we bought the kids a dog. The chipped tile by the stove where I dropped a cast iron pan in 1992. The paint marks on the garage wall where I tried and failed to learn to roller skate at 50. This house holds me together. So if they think they can just sweep me out like dust, they're going to find out how sharp an old woman's memory really is. That morning, I arrived at the county records office again, this time with copies of every document I owned and one very important phone number in my wallet. Miss Travers had warned me, "They'll stall, they'll pretend to help, they'll act like your paperwork is the problem. But the law is on your side," she said. "You've just got to make them see it that way." I stepped up to the same window, a different clerk now, younger, with short red hair and nails too long to type fast. "I'm here about parcel 41B, I said. "Ownership record." She blinked. "You were just here a few days ago." "Yes," I said. "And since then, I've filed an affidavit of ownership, a digital backup of the title, and this," I slid the letter across the counter, "is a legal notice of pending fraudulent claim." Her expression changed. Not scared, but alert. She read the letter, lips moving slightly. "You're accusing someone of—" "I'm not accusing," I interrupted. "I'm stating. If you check the request logs tied to my property, you'll find an inquiry filed under my son's name. He doesn't live here. He's not on the deed. He's not authorized to access or change anything." She hesitated, then typed something into her terminal. Sure enough, there it was. A flagged request for title transfer documentation, filed 2 weeks ago by someone who listed himself as acting representative. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I stayed still. "Thank you," I said. "Now I need a certified correction filed today, and I'd like to schedule a meeting with your supervisor." The woman swallowed. "We don't normally—" "This isn't normal," I said. "This is theft." An hour later, I walked out with stamped papers in hand. A hard copy went to Miss Travers, another to the bank. The last I slipped into my safe, wrapped in Henry's old bandana, the blue one he used when we painted the nursery all those years ago. That afternoon, I called a locksmith, told him I needed every lock replaced. He came by just before sunset. Young man, smelled like cigarettes and sawdust, polite enough to take his shoes off inside. "Someone try to break in?" he asked. "No," I said, watching him work. "Someone tried to disappear me." He chuckled like it was a joke. I didn't laugh. When he left, I stood in the foyer, listening to the click of the new deadbolt. Then I walked to the kitchen, pulled the chair out, and sat down with my tea. I wasn't just preparing anymore. I was reclaiming. Let them try to gaslight me, to fake my signature, to scrub my name from the map. They'll find that what's worn is not broken. What's old is not blind, and what's quiet is not weak. They forgot who taught them how to stand up in the first place. Well, I remember. He brought her this time. Not to say hello, not to make peace. They came like salesmen do, shoulders forward, smiles just shy of sincere, carrying a tray of bakery cookies. Like that would soften what they were really here for. She wore that beige cardigan she always does when she wants to look harmless. It doesn't suit her. Too soft for a woman who sharpens her kindness like a knife. He stood beside her, silent, letting her speak first, like he always does. "Mary Jean," she said, laying the cookies on my table without asking. "We thought we'd drop by and check on you. You've been on our minds." I smiled, very small. "Have I?" Her tone shifted just a hair. "Of course. We've all been under a lot of stress lately. It's not good for your health." I poured tea, Earl Grey as usual. 1 sugar in hers, no lemon. She hates sour things. She didn't notice I hadn't taken a cup for myself. My son stood behind her, hands folded like he was in church, eyes on the floor. "So," she continued, adjusting her sleeve with unnecessary care, "we wanted to talk to you about your living situation." I said nothing. She took that as permission. "You know, the market's at a peak. Developers are paying top dollar for land out here. I heard from a friend. One of their scouts came by recently, asked about the lot, said it was prime for subdivision." My hands were folded on the table, still. Old hands, soft at the edges, but not shaking. "We just think," she went on, "that it might be time. This place is full of memories, yes, but memories don't patch roofs or shovel driveways. You deserve something easier, something warmer, a place with a little community, don't you think?" Still, I said nothing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Slim, white, official. The edges were too sharp for anything good. "Now this," she said, sliding it across the table like it was nothing, "is just a preliminary agreement. Nothing binding yet, just a placeholder. It would allow us to handle the sale for you, and in return, you'd receive a generous share, enough to live comfortably. We've already spoken with a few people." "Who's we?" I asked, my voice dry. She hesitated, then gestured toward my son. "He's been trying to find the right time to bring it up." I turned to look at him. "Have you?" His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Mom, we thought it would be better to come to you together, to make sure you understand all the options." I picked up the folder, flipped it open, scanned the first page. No mention of me as the property owner. Just a clause about authorized family representatives. No signature lines with my name. They hadn't come to offer. They'd come to claim. I set the folder down, calmly. "Tell me," I said, "was the house going to burn before the signatures or after?" Her face went pale, fast. His did too. "Excuse me?" she asked, voice suddenly thin. "I heard you," I said. "Outside my kitchen window, the night you thought I'd gone to bed early. Burn her house down. She'll have nowhere to go." He stepped forward. "Mom, that was—" "I'm not finished," I said, my voice quiet but hard enough to stop him. "I've recorded every meeting since, filed a letter of ownership, changed the locks, informed the police, and now you sit here, feeding me threats in a porcelain cup, and think I'll mistake it for concern." She stood, face twisting. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I replied, "I'm being precise." "You're ruining everything," she snapped. "This could have been simple, dignified." "No," I said again. "It would have been theft, disguised in pleasantries." They stood there, stunned. "I'd like you to leave now," I said, rising slowly. My knees ached, but I stood taller than either of them. My son looked at me, truly looked, and for a moment I saw it. The shame, the fear, the flicker of the boy he used to be. But he turned, walked out without another word. She followed, spine stiff with fury. When the door closed behind them, I locked it, then turned the sign on the side window that said, "Do not disturb." It used to be Henry's joke, something he'd hang up when he napped on Sundays. Now, it meant something else. This wasn't over, but they'd made their move, and I'd made mine. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear. I've had enough of that in my life. The kind that keeps your shoulders up by your ears even when the house is quiet. No, this was something else. Something colder. Resolve. I sat by the kitchen window until almost 2 a.m., watching the wind pick up through the trees. The old storm door at the back creaked on its hinge, then slammed shut in a gust loud enough to make me flinch. That door was Henry's pride. Steel frame, triple latch, custom handle he carved himself from oak. It's held up through 30 winters and 3 hurricanes. Funny how the world wants to tear down what's built to last. The silence in the house after they left had felt hollow. Not empty like grief. Not like when Henry died and the clocks ticked too loudly. This was a different kind of quiet. Like the kind before a storm, when the sky holds its breath and the trees lean just slightly wrong. I kept waiting for something. A phone call. An apology. Maybe even a second knock on the door. But none came. Instead, sometime past midnight, I heard a car engine. Low. Slow. I stood without thinking, crossed to the front window, and pulled the curtain back just enough. It was my son's truck. Not parked, just idling across the street with its lights off. He didn't get out. He just sat there, watching the house. My breath caught in my chest, not from panic, but from the sheer absurdity of it. My own flesh and blood lurking like a burglar outside the home I raised him in. Did he think I wouldn't notice? That the dark would make him invisible? Or was he just checking, making sure the lights were off? That I was asleep? Vulnerable? I flipped the porch light on, bright as a bullet, direct as a warning. The truck drove off within seconds. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first to the sheriff's office. A quiet word with a deputy I've known since he was a boy. I told him about the threats, about the forged documents, about the strange behavior. He asked if I wanted to file a report. Not yet, I said, but I want it noted, logged, in case something happens. He agreed. The second call was to a friend of Henry's, a man named Walt, who installs cameras for a living now, mostly barns and workshops out in the county. He didn't ask questions, just said, "I can be there before lunch." By noon, I had eyes on every corner of the house, hidden ones, motion sensitive, connected to my phone. Let them come now. Let them try. By evening, the wind had picked up again, that same stormy hush in the air. I double-checked the new locks, closed every blind, and left the kitchen light on. And then I waited. Not because I was scared, because I knew the playbook. First comes pressure, then comes fear, then comes silence. And finally, when they think you're alone, tired, and too proud to ask for help, they move in. But I wasn't alone. I had my memories, my documentation, my cameras, my lawyer, my strength. And one more thing. On the counter sat an envelope I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside was a check. The payout from Henry's life insurance, left untouched all these years. I'd held on to it for something meaningful, something necessary. Maybe this was it. Not for them, not to save the house, but to protect what it stood for. The storm door slammed again around midnight, just once. I didn't flinch this time. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark. I may not be young, I may not be fast, but I am awake, and they will not take this from me. It started with the smell, not strong, just enough to prick the back of my throat, like a match struck in the next room or someone burning toast a few houses down. But this wasn't toast. I was in the living room when I noticed it. The clock read 2:17 a.m. First came the smell, then the pop. A small, sharp crack, like dry wood snapping, then silence. I moved slowly, the way you do when your body remembers more danger than your mind is ready to name. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, turned off the lamp, walked to the back of the house in my slippers. The porch light was still on. The kitchen looked normal, until I opened the back door and saw the smoke curling up from under the wooden steps. Thin, white, fresh. No flames yet, but enough to know it wasn't natural. Enough to know it was deliberate. My hand didn't shake as I turned on the hose. Didn't hesitate as I sprayed the edges of the deck, watching steam rise and vanish in the night air. There was no gasoline, no accelerant smell, nothing that would burn quick or bright. They weren't trying to torch the place. They were trying to send a message. Next time, we won't miss. But they had missed. In every possible way. Because as I stood there, soaked in dew and hose water, I didn't feel fear. I felt calm and clarity. I turned and looked up at the eave of the house where Walt had installed one of the cameras. The red light blinked once, then again, recording. When the deputy arrived 20 minutes later, I was already dry, already changed into clean clothes, already waiting at the table with a printed copy of the footage. He looked tired, young, the way they all seem lately. "Thank you for coming," I said, handing him the USB. "What's this?" "Footage from my security system. Someone came onto my property. Started a slow burn fire under the porch. Didn't get far." He frowned. "Did you see anyone?" "No, but the camera did." He sat down at my table, inserted the USB into his tablet. I watched his face change as the video played. There it was, the shadowy figure, hooded, walking with purpose, glancing over their shoulder, then crouching, then lighting something, holding it for too long, like they didn't know how to work a lighter properly. Teenager, maybe, or someone nervous. But when they turned to leave, the camera caught just enough of the profile to make a guess. A man, average build, familiar gait. He paused by the fence gate, looked back once, then vanished. The deputy exhaled. "You think you know who it is?" "I think I've raised someone foolish enough to think I'd never fight back." He gave me a long look. "Do you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "But I want it documented, and I want protection." He nodded. "I can assign drive-bys, and I'll file the report. But you should know, proving intent isn't the point," I interrupted. "The point is to let them know I'm not alone." He took the USB, wrote down his number, promised to keep me updated. When he left, I stood in the doorway and watched the street. Not for the shadow, not for the truck, but for the idea that someone thought I could be frightened into surrender. Let them whisper. Let them threaten. Let them light matches under moonlight. I have footage. I have insurance. I have fireproof boxes and copies in 3 places. And more than that, I have nothing left to lose. That makes a woman like me very dangerous. The smoke didn't enter the house. Not one wall was scorched, But something in me, something old and patient, had finally caught fire. They wanted to make a statement? So did I. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the light finally came, soft and gray through the front window, I was already dressed, cardigan on, folder in hand, tea made and left untouched on the counter. I didn't need caffeine. I needed action. At 8:01 a.m., I called my insurance agent. Not the automated line, not the help desk. I called Martha Green, the woman who's handled this property's policy for 16 years. She's seen every storm claim, every plumbing fiasco, every roof tile I've ever paid to replace. We've never met in person, but she knows the layout of my house better than some of my relatives. "Mary Jean?" she answered, her voice crisp as ever. "Everything okay?" "There was an incident," I said. "No damage, just intent." She went quiet. "Someone set a fire," I continued. "Small, under the porch. I caught it fast. Didn't even need the extinguisher. But I filed a police report, and I wanted it noted with you." She didn't ask if I was okay. Martha's not that kind of woman. She asked for the report number and timestamp. When I finished giving it to her, she paused again. "You know," she said slowly, "your policy includes a full risk rebuild clause. If the house is damaged beyond habitation, even due to arson, the payout covers structure, contents, and temporary lodging. Market value, not depreciated." "I remember," I said. "You insisted I keep that clause when I revised the coverage." "I did," she replied, "and I'm glad you listened." "So am I." There was another pause. Then, "Should I run a risk assessment on the property?" she asked. "Do it quietly," I said. "And don't update any contact information unless it's mine directly." "Understood." We hung up. I stood in my kitchen a long time, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. It was strange. I'd always thought fire would feel like destruction, chaos, endings. But this felt like clarity. They'd made their move, and I'd made mine. They thought I'd come undone at the first hint of smoke, that I'd throw up my hands, grab a suitcase, and beg for shelter, that I'd sell for pennies just to have peace. But I'd written every word of that insurance clause myself, with Martha. After Henry died, when I had to pretend I wasn't terrified of losing everything, I'd updated it 2 years ago, when they started circling like vultures. They thought I was too sentimental to plan for war. They were wrong. Later that morning, I printed copies of everything: the policy, the police report, the footage stills, the notarized affidavit of ownership. I put them in a fresh envelope and mailed it to my lawyer. I also mailed another envelope, smaller, to my granddaughter. Not because she needed to know, because I wanted her to remember. She was the only one who asked how I was when the others didn't. The only one who still sends real letters, not just texts with abbreviations and emojis. She'd asked once, years ago, "Grandma, what's the most powerful thing you've ever owned?" I'd said, "Paper." Now I was proving it. By sunset, I'd received an email from Martha. Subject: confidential. Risk report. "Mary Jean, based on your property's history and the recent incident, I'm flagging your account for proactive protection. You qualify for full relocation coverage if anything happens, and we're moving your file into internal priority handling. We've also placed a block on third-party contact attempts unless verified through your voice authorization. Stay safe. Martha." I smiled as I read it. No panic, no fear, just reinforcement. They thought the fire would weaken me. Instead, it's the only reason the house now has more value than ever. The clause they forgot was the one I wrote, and the woman they underestimated is still standing. He knocked gently, like a man who didn't want to startle the elderly. I recognized the silhouette through the glass. Wide shoulders, brown uniform, and that same boyish face from 20 years ago. Deputy Marcus Reed. Used to mow lawns in the summers when he was 12. Now he carried a badge and a sidearm and a notepad that looked heavier than it was. I opened the door. "Morning, Mrs. Harper," he said, tipping his hat the way polite men still do. "Come in, Marcus," I replied. "I've got the kettle on." He hesitated, just a flicker, then stepped inside. I could feel the shift in his posture as soon as he crossed the threshold. He scanned the room like he was trained to, eyes catching on the camera set up by the back door, the tidy stack of papers on the coffee table, the way I moved slowly but with intention. This wasn't a social visit. "Appreciate you reporting the incident," he said, sitting down as I handed him a mug. "I almost didn't," I replied. But then I remembered how many times I've been told to let things go. Turns out that's exactly how people get burned. He nodded, serious now. We reviewed the footage. It's clear someone intended to ignite a fire, but it didn't spread. Minimal damage, no injuries. It's being logged as attempted arson, property endangerment. "And trespassing?" I asked. He nodded again. "That too. We're still reviewing leads. Do you have reason to believe someone specific might be involved?" I met his eyes. "Marcus," I said softly, "you were in diapers when my son played baseball in this backyard. I used to bring orange slices and Gatorade for you boys. You know this house. You know this town. And you know who has something to gain if I'm gone." He looked down at his mug, said nothing. "I won't name names," I continued. "But I will say this. I'm not crazy. I'm not forgetful. And I'm not about to lie down quietly so someone else can cash in on what my husband and I built." He looked up, face unreadable. "You want protection?" "No," I said. "I want documentation. I want you to look me in the eye and say this is going to be investigated properly, even if the fingerprints are familiar." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside it, a partially melted lighter, black casing, gold trim. He set it gently on the table. "You recognize this?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "It's my son's. I gave it to him on his 21st birthday. Custom order. That engraving on the bottom." I reached for it. He turned the bag over. There it was, just visible beneath the soot. "To William, light your own way." I let out a long breath, equal parts grief and confirmation. "That doesn't prove anything," Marcus said carefully. "It could have been lost, borrowed, planted, but it's significant." "It's enough," I said. "For me." He hesitated. "Do you want to press charges?" "Not yet. But I want it filed." He wrote something in his notebook. The scratch of the pen sounded like thunder in the quiet room. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "You're not what people expect," he said quietly. I smiled. "That's the last advantage I have." He tipped his hat again and left. I locked the door, poured the rest of the tea down the sink. Then I walked into the study, opened Henry's old desk drawer, and pulled out the leather envelope I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a letter he wrote me the winter before he passed. His handwriting shaky, but still strong. "Mary Jean, if you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. I know you'll try to solve it with grace because that's who you are. But if they push back. You've always been more than they see. Love, H." I sat down, letter in hand, heart steady. They'd set fire to my porch. But I had fuel of my own, years of it, quiet, patient, waiting. And now the law knew it too. They didn't come back, not for a few days. Maybe they were waiting to see if I'd buckle, if the fire, the folder, the police visit would shake me loose, that I'd retreat into some facility and leave the land like a discarded coat. But I didn't retreat. I baked. Lemon bars this time, from scratch with real zest and not too much sugar. I placed a small plate of them on the porch rail, just under the security camera. That wasn't an accident. Nothing I did now was. By noon, I had 3 phone calls from neighbors I hadn't heard from in years. The first was Betty, who once sat beside me in the choir. She said she'd heard something and wanted to check in. The second was Mildred, a widow like me, sharp as a sewing needle and twice as fast. The third was Teresa. I hadn't spoken to her since the church fundraiser when she'd dropped a pie and blamed the Lord's will. All 3 said the same thing in different ways. "We heard you're being pressured." I didn't ask how they knew. News moves through a town like this without needing legs. Each of them offered something: support, information, a contact. But it was Teresa who said the words that mattered most. "You're not the only one it's happened to," she whispered, like we were still in pews. "They've done this before. Your son and that wife of his, not with fires, but with pressure, with tricks. Made an old man sign away his trailer park spot, said it was for estate simplification. 3 months later, they flipped the lot to a developer." My stomach didn't drop. Not this time. Now I just filed it. Another piece of a puzzle they thought no one else was putting together. By evening, 2 more women showed up with casseroles. They didn't say they were checking on me, but I noticed how their eyes darted to the porch, the locks, the cameras. Then one of them, June, a retired schoolteacher, leaned in close as I opened the door. "You need a lawyer who's not just a lawyer," she said. "You need someone who knows women like us. I've got a name." I thanked her. She scribbled it on the back of a recipe card and left with barely a goodbye. That night, I called Miss Travers and told her about the casserole brigade. "They're rallying," I said, not without surprise. "Of course they are," she replied. "You're not the only woman in this town they've tried to erase. But you might be the first to make them regret it." I liked that. The next morning, I met with the woman June recommended. Her office was just outside town, in an old farmhouse turned firm. Her name was Delia Monroe. Silver hair, straight spine, voice like gravel dipped in honey. I gave her everything: the documents, the footage, the insurance clause, the lighter with the engraving, the pattern of intimidation, the notarized affidavits, the bank notifications. She read in silence. Then she looked at me and said, "This is enough." "For court?" I asked. "For blood," she said. "But we'll start with court." Her confidence wasn't flashy. It was earned. I left with a file in my hand and a fire in my ribs. Let them think I'm old. Let them think I'm soft. What I am is done waiting. What I am is prepared. And when the court date comes, I won't come as a victim. I'll come as the woman who built this house, slept beside her husband in it for 4 decades, buried him under the pine tree in the backyard, and still wakes up every morning knowing exactly who she is. They want to reduce me to a problem? They're about to meet the solution. The smell of scorched wood stayed longer than the damage itself. Even after the porch boards were replaced, after the soot was scrubbed away and the insurance check cleared, I could still catch it sometimes. that faint, bitter trace in the air when the sun hit the deck just right. I didn't mind it. It reminded me what I'd survived. The insurance payout arrived faster than I expected. Martha didn't waste time. She called personally to confirm the full coverage had been approved, minus a deductible I could pay with my grocery cash. "You want a full rebuild?" she asked. "Or just restoration?" "Neither," I said. "I want it better than it was. My way." She chuckled. "I thought you might." The contractors came 2 days later. Not the ones my son used to hire. Slick men in pickup trucks who talked like they were doing you a favor. No, these were neighbors, friends of friends. One had even fixed our barn roof back in '89. Before they started, I asked them to sit with me on the porch. "I know what this house was," I said, "but I want you to help me make it what it needs to be now. I'm not trying to erase the past. I just want to protect what's still mine." They listened, took notes, asked questions no one had asked me in years. By the end of the week, the back deck had been fully rebuilt, with fire-retardant wood and a reinforced frame. The upstairs windows were resealed, the locks upgraded, the doorbell wired to a live camera that pinged directly to my phone. But it wasn't just security I was after. I had the old sunroom converted into a writing nook, something I'd wanted for decades but never had time for. I had the walls repainted, not beige like before, but soft blue, like the sky on mornings Henry and I used to walk barefoot across the yard. They tried to scare me into leaving. Instead, they gave me the reason to stay louder. I kept working with Delia, too. She was methodical, patient, ruthless when it counted. We filed the restraining order first, quietly, just a legal wall between me and their next attempt. Then we filed the civil suit, fraud, attempted theft, and property tampering. She delivered it in person. They showed up the next day. Not with cookies this time, not with smiles. He looked tired. She looked furious. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, holding the papers like they were a dead bird. "Yes," I said, "and late, if anything." "You're suing your own son," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "I'm defending what he thought he could steal." He didn't say a word, just stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in his mother's doorway. I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the truck idling across the street, the missing title, the fire. "You did this," he finally said. "You escalated everything." "No," I replied, stepping back inside. "You did, when you stopped seeing me as a person." And I shut the door. Behind it, I stood still for a moment, hand on the knob, heart steady. They had underestimated the house. They had underestimated me. Now the walls were stronger, the locks tighter, the foundation firmer than it had been in 20 years. They'd tried to destroy something solid. Instead, they forced me to reinforce it. Not just with wood and nails, but with truth, with dignity, with the kind of strength that only comes from being left for ash and choosing to rise anyway. This wasn't a renovation. It was a reclamation, and every brick said, "I am still here." The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not the air, the feeling. All that stone and glass, polished brass and beige carpet, designed to look neutral. But to me, it felt like a place where stories went to die if you didn't hold them tight. I wore my church coat, the dark navy one with the stitched cuffs, not because I wanted to dress up, but because it made me feel like a woman worth listening to. Delia walked beside me, calm as a Sunday morning. She carried the case file like it weighed nothing, but I knew how heavy it truly was. On the other side of the room sat my son. His hair was shorter, his jaw clenched. He didn't look at me. She did. His wife. Her expression wasn't smug anymore. It was flat, defensive, like a chess player who'd run out of moves but still refused to flip the board. The judge was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, clean glasses, tired eyes, but fair. I could tell from how he listened, not just to what was said, but what wasn't. Delia spoke first. She laid out the facts like thread across a loom. The attempt to transfer title, the missing documents, the lighter found at the scene. The insurance clause, the notarized statements, the footage. And then, my statement. I didn't cry. I didn't falter. I stood, small and still in that wide room, and told the truth in the plainest language I had. This house was not just built with money, I said. It was built with marriage and illness and winter heat we couldn't always afford. It was built with birth and death and quiet meals eaten in silence after arguments we didn't know how to resolve. I paused, let the air settle. And now, someone who never earned it tried to take it. I turned to the judge. I am not confused. I am not angry. I am not here for revenge. I am here for recognition that what is mine cannot be rewritten by the people who stopped treating me like family the moment I became inconvenient. No one spoke, not even the wife. When I sat down, Delia reached over and squeezed my hand. It didn't take long. The judge ruled in my favor. Restraining order upheld. Property confirmed. Civil penalties applied. They didn't fight it. Not really. They knew. Afterward, they passed me in the hallway, quiet as ghosts. He paused. Just once. Looked at me like he wanted to say something. Maybe, sorry. Maybe, I thought you'd never fight back. But he didn't say anything, and I didn't need him to. I walked out into the afternoon light, the wind soft and cool against my face. Delia smiled. It's done, she said. No, I replied. It's just settled. We parted ways, and I drove home alone. Past the fields turning brown with fall. Past the shops where no one knew what had happened behind closed doors. Past the stretch of road where Henry once ran out of gas and called me laughing. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The rebuilt porch looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. The structure had changed. The foundation had been reinforced. The quiet was different now. Not emptiness. Peace. They came for the land, for the equity, for the idea that old women are soft targets. But they left with less than they started with. And I came back stronger. I don't open all the curtains in the morning anymore, not because I'm hiding, because I choose which windows let in the light. That's different. There's one in the kitchen, just above the sink, that faces the pine tree where Henry is buried. I open that one first. Always have. Always will. He doesn't need sunlight, but I like to think he still appreciates it. The rest of the house wakes up slow now. No alarms. No voices calling, "Mom," from down the hall. Just the tick of the wall clock, the hum of the fridge, the soft creak of the stairs when I move too quickly. I used to think a quiet house meant loneliness. Now I know better. It means the noise has finally left. After the court ruled, the letters stopped. No more friendly suggestions. No more unexpected drop-ins. They didn't apologize. Of course they didn't. People like that don't say sorry. They just go silent and wait for you to forget. But I don't forget. I still have the court papers, the restraining order, the title, the footage, the police report. All filed, all real, all mine. And the house? It's warmer now. not just because of the new insulation and double-paned windows, because of what it survived. Because it knows, like I do, that it's no longer under siege. We've both earned our quiet. Last week, I had coffee with Teresa and June and two other women I barely knew before this started. We didn't talk about sons or property or fire. We talked about peach cobbler and the price of yarn and which birds are the loudest in spring. And after they left, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the horizon stretch wide and open. I didn't feel small. I felt solid. There's power in staying, in saying, no, not today, not me. They said I'd fold. They said I'd be scared. They said, burn her house down, she'll have nowhere to go. But I stood in the flames, with the papers in my name, with the cameras running, with the law on my side, with the voice they forgot I still had. And I didn't just keep my house. I kept myself. So to anyone reading this, anyone who's been called too much or too old or too emotional, I'll say this plain. They'll come for what you built. They'll tell you it's time to let go. They'll act like your story ended when your usefulness did. Don't believe them. Stand in the fire if you have to. Just make sure your name is on the deed. And when you've found your footing again, tell someone. Tell a friend. Tell your daughter. Tell another woman who's been made small. Because this isn't just my story. It's ours. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment. Send it to someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to stand up. They tried to burn her down. She stood in the flames, and she won.